Well, every day we do a few more things on this Pinto project, and we find a few more things on this Pinto project. And don't know if it's coming through on the video or not, but it's windy today in the backyard. But this is just we put somebody has put a big engine in a little car, and that's not the first time it's been done. But man, there's a lot of heat in this engine compartment. Now we've punched some holes in the fender well on this side to let some of the heat out, and we've got to do the same on the other side. And we've been chasing a problem with the fuel pressure, and that after about 15-20 minutes, let's say when the engine gets up to around 200 degrees, we lose the fuel pressure. And we've got a gauge right here, and I mean the fuel pressure goes to zero. And yesterday when we ran, we were even getting vapor out of the vent tube in the carburetor. So that tells me that we're just heating the fuel. So when you do one of these projects, think about where you run your lines and how you put things. And the more I get looking at things, down here, we have a brake line. Now, you build these cars, and it's not like it came that way. You have the opportunity to put the brake line wherever you want. So why would you run it right next to the header? What kind of sense does that make? I measured those header tubes yesterday when the engine was running. They get to be 500 degrees. So you've got 4 tubes, 500 degrees each, and the brake line is within not even a half an inch of the header. So we're either going to have to get down there and reroute the brake lines, or we're going to have to figure out how to insulate the brake line. Either insulate the header or insulate the brake line. And you got to put some thought into this stuff, people, when you do this kind of stuff. The other thing that happens, we can whip around here the other way, is that this car has an electric fan, and when it gets up to temperature and you turn the electric fan on, it blows all of the heat off the radiator back right here onto the fuel line. So all of a sudden, and your fuel pump is right down there, the fuel pump is 170, 180 degrees. This fuel line gets to be 180 degrees, and it vaporizes the fuel before it ever gets to the carburetor, and you lose the fuel pressure. So, maybe on this car, and I have yet to figure it out yet, maybe a mechanical fuel pump is not a good idea. It might come to the point where this car needs to have an electric fuel pump, and that fuel pump just needs to go away down there, and we figure out how to route the lines so they're not overheating. The other thing that I see in looking closer, and maybe you can see there, is the lower radiator connection. So this is a cross flow radiator, and I'm not a radiator guy, but it seems to me the water comes out of the engine, goes in the top of the radiator, goes down through the radiator, comes out the bottom, and goes back to the engine. So why would you put the lower connection that goes back to the engine 4 inches above the bottom of the radiator? How does that work? How are you getting the water out of the bottom of the radiator if you put the outlet way up here? And I mean, the way this is done, you're going to have to re-engineer the whole damn car to fix that. And I think this is probably a custom radiator. Why would you do that? Maybe somebody can chime in and explain it to me, but I don't think it's too spiffy. So, you just get these things, and you really, people don't think. They just don't think. They put things in places, and then they just go, oh, that looks good. I'll put this here and put that there and put this here, and I don't really even care what happens to it after I put it there. In this particular case, I guess if you were just running this car down the quarter mile, it wouldn't run long enough to have that problem. But if you want to drive it on the street, it's going to be tricky. I have to figure out what we're going to do here. I have some vents that I'm considering putting in the hood. I'd rather not, just to let the heat up out of the engine compartment. One of the things we used to do in the old days is shim the back of the hood where the hinges are and tip the back of the hood up, and that would allow the air to get out from under the back of the hood. I might do that. I don't really like the look of that, but that's a quick and dirty way to get something done. So we'll have to see. But just it's a little annoying that every day I look at this thing, I see something else that just doesn't make sense. Here we go on the other side of the car, and you can see the same doggone thing. There's the brake line right there, and you can't put your finger between that brake line and that header pipe. So what do you think is happening to the brake fluid while you're driving along, and all of a sudden you need the brakes to work, and the headers have already heated the brake fluid up to 500 degrees. That's not so good. Okay, our latest science experiment. We're putting an electric fuel pump on this puppy, this Pinto. There's just too much heat up there in the engine compartment for that standard fuel pump. So we've got a fuel cell in the Pinto. There you can see the sump here and the dash 8 coming out. So we've got this electric fuel pump. We're going to mount it over here off of the sub rail. And what we did in this application is I cut a hole in the floor. This plate here takes the place of the original Pinto gas tank that bolted into the trunk. This is a 5/16 inch thick steel plate. So that ought to add some weight to this back here, and it ought to tie the sides together. So we had to take our hole saw and cut a 2.5 inch hole up through that plate. I've got a piece of tubing, some exhaust tubing, and basically we're going to make a little hat up inside the trunk so that this pump can sit up higher. I just don't like, just got it kind of hung in there, but I don't like these pumps hanging down. You see them under the back of the car hanging down real low, and I don't like that. So this is going to allow us to tuck this pump right up inside, and just a little dome inside the trunk there next to the fuel cell to cover the top of the fuel pump motor and keep everything tidy and sealed up. And then we'll run our dash 8 Aeroquip line up to the existing fuel line, and we'll plumb a new line from here over to the sump, and Bob's your uncle. What I've got to do here is make some spacers to go between the sub rail and the pump to space that pump out so that it goes right up through that hole, right in the center of that hole. So we need a couple of 1/2 inch. I've got some UHMW plastic that we can make some spacers, and then we'll have a little rubber pad there to try to insulate that, to reduce some of the vibration, and we should be good to go. Here we got the fuel pump mounted in place. Got some ugly green spacers there between the frame and the pump, but we've got it all plumbed in, and looks like it's going to be fine. We've got it, we went ahead and hooked it up to our jumper power source, so make sure we haven't got any leaks. And we're still going to make our little hat inside the trunk. And the other thing we've got to do is we still have to wire it, and probably will, for safety's sake, wire it through one of those impact switches, so that if we happen to get upside down or in a big crash, it'll shut the power off to the fuel pump. Okay, so we've finished up plumbing our new system here in the front. Got our lines coming in insulated, get our fuel pressure regulator bolted there on the fender panel and adjusted to 5.5 pounds. We're going to have to make a support that bolts here and comes up, holds this line, because I don't like that just hanging out there. And since we got in there and got the fuel pump out, we started on our other project, which is new motor mounts. I really didn't like that whole contraption that was in there before, and we're going to do something a little different. And what I'm waiting on now, we've got some brackets coming that'll come out and sit under that, and we're going to have to modify them to hopefully bolt to this frame rail, and then there'll be a cushion under here, so we're going to get away from solid motor mounts. I don't really see the need for those. These bolts right now are a little too long, so we're going to have to modify them. But that's the next project.